Our second film is Soongava, Dance of the Orchids, which was released in 2012 and was directed by Subarna Thapa. It's a film about two Nepali women who start a relationship. One of them has a fiance who she ends up leaving, and it's basically about how this couple navigates their relationship in a society where that's very much not the norm. I don't know. I always find it difficult to say I enjoyed a film that's so, I don't know, in the end. But I thought it was a really interesting and really good film. I really liked the portrayal of the relationship. What I particularly liked was that there was such a strong focus on the couple itself. I feel like in a lot of Western films and shows, it can happen quite a lot that there's women that are just sort of plot devices and not really necessary characters, so they are often not even given a name, or you don't ever see their face or anything. And I found it an interesting choice that in this film, the fiance, who sort of has quite a bit of impact on the story, is never actually, like, we never actually get to see his face. He's just sort of this entity that impacts these women's lives, but the film is just it's made very clear that the film isn't about him. And I found that a very interesting choice. What did you think about the film overall? What did you think about the characters?
Yeah, I agree. I liked the film. I didn't love it. I felt it was sort of a bit formulaic, like in terms of, I don't know, it kind of rubbed me the wrong way that it had such a horrible ending. Like, I feel like that's the case in a lot of early Western gay films, that it will show two gay people falling in love, but then society punishes them and they end up having horrible fates. Although I guess that's not the case. One of the ladies had a horrible fate and the other one maybe have some hope in their future. But I agree. I really like the chemistry between the two leads. I thought that was really strong. And I really like that, it actually does spend a lot of time getting to know them and getting to know why they love each other and their connection and their hopes and dreams. That was really nice.
Yeah.
I liked watching the film. Like, it was compelling. And it wasn't too, like, there was some melodrama, but it wasn't too over the top. It felt a nice level of realism and relatively understated performances and whatnot. When it all sort of hits the fan and the family's, rejecting them and attacking them and they're getting kicked out of their apartment, that was all pretty horrible and depressing. And I mean, it's obviously realistic. Like, obviously a lot of people go through that. But it just felt, like I wasn't exactly sure what the film was saying, other than if you're gay, you'll be rejected by society and possibly killed.
I mean, I do think it's very, very worth keeping in mind that this is basically like a very early LGBTQ film in Nepal, right? Like 2012. Like, it's like surprising that a film like that has such a sympathetic and empathetic and positive portrayal of a lesbian couple was made in Nepal in 2012. And it's potentially quite a brave move by the director and the actors involved to even put this project on.
That's a good point. And I guess it does have like a social realist or a socially conscious element where it's kind of reflecting elements of society that Nepal or any country really would rather not look at. Like, it's kind of holding a mirror up to certain attitudes in society that we'd rather not acknowledge. I also think it is brave just in general to show a lesbian romance. I feel like romances with lesbian characters are front and center. They're not side characters. It's actually pretty rare in cinema in general. Like, I could probably count on one hand the Western films that have a lesbian romance at their center. I think the characters themselves were quite compelling. So I really like that aspect of it. And I would recommend the film. I think it's a good film. Just the ending is, super depressing.
It is, yeah. It was also sort of an interesting choice because from what I understand, so Nepali culture is very family focused, and family has a much higher value than I think in most Western cultures. And they don't seem to sort of have there seem to be some cultures where honor killings are sort of accepted, but this doesn't seem to be like a common thing there. Like murdering your own family member is still much, much worse than having a family member that lives in sin for or has a relationship that brings disgrace to your family or anything. So that was still sort of quite an extreme thing for the brother to do, and was far from sort of like an expected or normal behavior or anything, which it could potentially be in some other cultures. I did like a little bit of research and a little bit of Googling, and it seemed to me like when honor killings do happen, they tend to be more sort of, if you have someone in your family who is in a relationship with someone in a lower caste, you might kill the person who's like, you might kill that partner who's from a lower caste.
Really?
Yeah, to like prevent that shameful relationship from happening, rather than killing your own family member, because at the end of the day, your family is still your family, and that has a very high value. So yeah, does that seem like, did I represent that fairly, Pukar?
Yeah, I mean, God, honor killings do happen, but like it is very frowned upon. Murdering in general is frowned upon.
That's good.
I think I was really shocked that this film even existed, to be honest. And especially that it even came out when it did. It just boggles my mind that someone funded this, and there were people who acted and directed this, and particularly in a story that portrays a gay couple in a pretty positive light. Like, we get to know their sort of individual personality, we get to know why they like each other, we get to sort of bond with the couple themselves, and everyone else who holds a more sort of traditionalist view of relationships are portrayed as antagonists here. And that's not the there is a lot of discrimination that exists for people of various sexuality and gender fluidity, and it's not the norm view to have people of a variety of different sexuality in relationships, and it just seemed. I was just so shocked that this film even existed, and I think the film in itself, I don't think is amazing, but I think the fact that it exists is just fantastic, and I really hope there's more of films like that. I couldn't see more, but maybe I just don't look into Nepali cinema as much as I should.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that maybe what jarred me about the film is that the first 45 minutes to an hour is quite light and positive. Like, it's almost like a romantic comedy for the first half of the film. Like, just them getting to know each other. And there's, the tension with her getting married or getting engaged, but she breaks that off and says, I'm committed to you, blah, blah, blah. But then, it takes quite a dark turn in the final half hour. And it doesn't necessarily, like, the prejudice, I guess, they're facing isn't as, maybe I just wasn't noticing it, but it didn't feel like it was as foregrounded in the first half of the film the way that, say, it is in like Brokeback Mountain, where it's these two characters falling in love, but they're constantly saying, we can't let other people know about this. What happens to gay people in the South or whatever. Whereas here it's like, I don't know, it's almost like they don't talk about it. It never becomes an issue. Like, they never question whether society will accept them until they start telling people and everyone rejects them.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I was wondering, because it didn't really focus a lot on that, which I think is something that would have been interesting to look at. But I also like this sort of interpretation where they were like, yeah, we're going to do this, and we think we can make this work, rather than very much, we need to keep this hidden because X, Y, Z might happen, which I think are definitely considerations that someone would have. It's just the film didn't really go into that, which I thought was an interesting choice.
Yeah, I guess like it almost felt like they were too naive. They should absolutely, of course, be allowed to fall in love and have a relationship, but it felt like they weren't questioning the way they were going to do it, like, or aware of how deep the prejudices of their family members were. Considering that they grew up in the same families, you'd think they'd be aware of how visceral the reactions of their siblings and parents would have been. But I guess it's tricky because, like, the element of family is more pronounced than it is, for example, in Western films. Like a lot of their anger seems to be about honor rather than like the religious elements that it seems to play into other films. But maybe there are religious elements that are at work in this film, but it didn't like, I guess I'm sorry, I'm muddling what I'm trying to say, but I guess gay relationships in Western films or American films, often they're decried as being against God or against the natural order or blah, blah, blah. Whereas here it seems to be like dishonoring the family name. That seems to be what everyone's so upset about.
I think it's definitely sort of worth bearing in mind that in Nepali culture, that does seem much like relationships reflect much more on a family or like on the two families involved than just the two individuals, which is sort of a more Western perspective, I suppose. So like who you marry, like it's not so much that two people marry, it's more like a marriage joins two families together in a way, and it's sort of a much bigger deal in that sense. And there is definitely that sort of sense of, I think, like I get the impression that there's definitely that sense that if your child marries someone or like is in a relationship with someone who's unsuitable for reasons of ethnicity, caste, sexual orientation, like anything that just makes someone sort of a traditionally unsuitable partner or like unworthy partner, it just reflects much more on the family as a whole. It's not just this one person that made a bad decision. It's like a failure in the family.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
I
there's
mean,
something wrong with the family, or it isolates the family from connecting to other families through
Yeah, and there's
marriage.
definitely that sense of the parents are going to have to justify why their children are doing this wrong thing. And it'll reflect negatively on the parents and their standing in society and culture.
yeah, definitely. Like, I mean, the sort of the big difference that comes to mind is so here in the UK, right? When you introduce yourself, you say I'm Pukar, and you know you might say a whole name, but people don't really go into where's your family or which family are you a part of. But in Nepal, a lot of the introductions will be, this is my name, and they will focus on your family name and say, oh, I see that family name. Are you from this family in this place? Yes, no, XYZ. So there's a lot more sort of care about which family you come from and which family unit you're in. And I think that that sort of follows through, that anything that goes wrong or anything that seems to sort of fall outside what is considered normal does impact the reputation and social standing of a family, and that can be particularly even more important for those who are in a higher caste and considered to be of a higher social standing than others. So yeah, definitely a lot more focus on family than the individual in Nepali films.
I think we also very much see that in Dia's relationship with her fiance and how that's sort of arranged. Because in the beginning they talk about how, is this the fiance like a business partner of a cousin or something? That's some sort of like family relationship via which this gets set up.
I think it's the friend of her brother-in-law, I think.
Oh, right. Yeah. But yeah, so there's a family connection there, and her breaking off the engagement then also means like her brother-in-law or whoever is going to have to justify that to his friends or whoever. Like this match between Dia and her fiance involves a lot more people than just Dia and her fiance, and has sort of much wider ranging impact on multiple people and sort of how they'll be viewed and respected within society. And that's just a sort of very different kind of pressure on individual relationships.
And we see a bit of that in White Sun, where Chandra's ex-wife says, like, I'm divorced, or I've had a child out of wedlock, and if she doesn't have a father, she'll never be able to go to school. So the effects of that kind of social prejudice can affect the rest of your life and the rest of your children's life and anyone who's connected to you. It just extends outward. But I guess the tragedy of this film is, and White Sun as well, is it's not society that people blame, it's the people who don't fit into society that get all the blame.
And with Chandra, very much, I think we also see how this isn't just sort of prejudice on a sort of personal level, but the reason she needs someone to claim her daughter, like to claiming to be the father of her daughter is that she needs a birth certificate for her, and she can't get a birth certificate for her if she doesn't have the father's signature. So it's not even just that sort of people are judgmental about it. It's also just this very real, like, bureaucratic barrier that she can't overcome unless she finds a way to sort of conform to the societal standards.
Yeah, it's a very institutionally sort of built prejudice, where even things like just her being able to go to school is affected by if you don't fit in the norm that the system is created for. I do think the focus on the two leads, and I think an interesting part of it was that some of the prejudice comes from, what am I trying to say? I've sort of modeled myself as well. A scene that comes to mind is when the head teacher of the school fires her, and he says, I think, he doesn't necessarily seem to say, I disagree with what you do, I think it's wrong, or X, Y, Z. He says, you know what, you do you, but unfortunately, the parents aren't sending the students here. They don't want their kids around you. And so I have no choice but to fire you. Right.
It was also quite noticeable that it was the girls that were being taken out of the class, because at some point we see her, I think, like the last girl is taken out of the class by her mom, and there's still a bunch of boys there. So that seems to be, I don't know, that was just something that we noticed.
Yeah, and also like in context, right? So in terms of legal rights, I think 2007 or 8, homosexuality was legalized.
Oh, wow.
And so like, there are legal rules banning discrimination or creating these rights, but the problem also lies in lack of implementation and enforcing. And like legalizing something definitely does help change views and attitudes, but the cultural shift is ongoing, and it's something that is constantly being fought for even now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like Dia probably would have had legal protection against being fired there, but hypothetically, but like practically that didn't do her any good because it wasn't going to be enforced or anything. So
yeah, I mean, like,
money seems to speak louder than laws, because it's like, oh, if people are pulling their kids out of my school and I'm losing money, like, what other choice do I have? And the same with the brother-in-law, I guess. It's like, this breaking off of this engagement is going to affect my business prospects. Like, that's what it's not just this kind of ideology or attitude. It's like affecting all elements of my life.
Yeah, and it's not just, like, so the brother's business prospects are affected, which means the family's income is affected, which means the family's financial standing might be affected, right? It sort of follows on, particularly when Dia and a partner go sort of public, and they're reporters, and they go to, I think, they're much more sort of, their relationship is publicized, and then it affects the family's ability to create business relationships. And it's this sort of like, oh, this person was in your family, I don't know what's wrong with your family, but I don't particularly want to associate myself with it. And sort of like, it can affect a lot of areas outside of that immediate individual, and so it gets treated even more at least it tries to be contained as much as possible, and put into the sort of the norm as much as it can be. And what's her name? Kieran's mum tries to sort of bring her back, right? She says, you know what? Just get in the car. We don't need to talk about this. We'll just forget all of it has happened. We'll just go back to norm, so that we can sort of keep it hidden, sort of shove it under the carpet, so that the world as a whole doesn't find out, and all of that. So I think there's definitely a lot more focus on what happens to the family.
I find it just really heartbreaking knowing that there are people in Nepal who are gay or maybe not cisgender, or I don't know, have like various sort of identity things that clash with what's sort of normal and accepted. And like, as someone who sort of had to figure out my own sexuality in Western culture, like, that's difficult enough, even though it doesn't have anywhere near these obstacles and implications. And I'm just finding that really heartbreaking, that it's just so like it must just be so difficult and disheartening to have so much additional pressure placed on you when you're just trying to figure out who you like and you just want to be with the person you like. And yeah, relationships are hard enough without any obstacle. And I don't know, yeah.
And this film doesn't really offer that much hope to like young
really
or old,
doesn't.
queer people in in Nepal.
No.
It's like pretty much saying, just keep it inside, otherwise your whole life will be ruined.
Yeah, I mean,
and your whole
like,
family's life will be ruined.
Yeah, at least these characters are treated sympathetically, right? At least the film is sort of saying, I read the film as saying, not everyone thinks that you shouldn't be allowed to be together. Here is a sympathetic portrayal of these characters, and they have the right to be on screen, and they have the right for their story to be told, which, you know, is something. But I mean, ultimately the outcome isn't too confidence inspiring. So.
Yeah, I think if it does any good or changes any minds, it'll be the people who maybe do have the prejudices, and maybe this will shake them out of it a bit by seeing two, you know, sympathetic people who fall in love but are just, you know, torn apart, and maybe they'll rethink the way that they treat people or the way that they think.
I hope so. Although I think the messaging, I think the depressing ending sort of, I wonder whether people will sort of take it away with, look what happened. Someone lost their life, right, as a result of doing this, and the family, the brother who committed the murder turns himself in, so he goes to jail. So the family's torn apart, and I do wonder whether some of the messaging that would be taken away is, look, it's not going to work, right? Even as sympathetic as it is, ultimately, you don't want the family broken apart. You don't want people dying, and I really don't think that's the best messaging here.
I mean, I suppose it's overly optimistic and probably not accurate, but I would really sort of wish that the messaging would be like that people would be able to take away more something like, well, they were doing fine and they were happy together, and if the families hadn't like, if I don't know, like the brother didn't have to kill them, if the or didn't have to kill her, if the family had been supportive, then that wouldn't have happened, right? I guess there's like different options for where to sort of shift the responsibility for what happened, right?
Exactly. Like, if the family had supported them, they might have been fine. Like, the family might have figured out a way of going forward, and I don't know.
But I guess alternatively, you can also just say if they weren't gay or if they didn't have a relationship, none of this would have happened, which is the message I would hope people wouldn't take away from it. But I suppose you can if that's sort of how you're predisposed anyway. So I don't know.
This film makes me think a lot of so there were films in the past which I remember watching, and it was sort of a same storyline, except instead of a gay relationship, it was a relationship between people of different castes. And it was the sort of the same storyline where it would be, you know, they're a sympathetic couple, but then there is usually some sort of tragic death at the end. And I remember sort of the commentary behind that was, again, yes, we understand this is sympathetic and all of that, but ultimately society isn't there yet, in the sense that even the death that occurred there was a result of society. So the attribution is that society isn't ready, which put undue pressure on the family, which put undue pressure on the brother, who then ended up killing the sister, right? Like that's where sort of the blame attribution kind of gets diffused to society. And you can change a person's behavior, but changing a society's behavior is difficult and you know, next to impossible for single family or single person. And so like I do think like there is an element of that in there, and sort of I do wonder whether people are sort of going to take that away from it, is that, well, nothing can be done because society just needs to change, and we can't do anything ourselves by it. We just got to wait for society to change, and that's not really how societal change happen. So
it's framed more as a cautionary tale, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also sort of worth thinking about where Nepalese culture is sort of on their timeline of becoming more accepting towards relationships, because I suppose we we have that everywhere in the world, right? There was a time when mixed race relationships were illegal in the US, and gay marriage has not been legal for that long in a lot of Western countries. And I guess Nepal is also sort of going through that sort of transition, both legally and on a society level, of becoming more accepting. I get the sense that it's becoming sort of increasingly more accepting to marry outside of your caste. Would you say that's
Yeah,
fair?
that's definitely the case. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but maybe we're not quite at accepting mixed race relationships yet, and then LGBTQ relationships are just like another step further away than that, and it's just, I don't know.
If we sort of contrast, like homosexuality was decriminalized in England and Wales in 1967, and it's not like after that overnight everyone was okay with it. There was definitely a cultural shift that needed to happen, and legalizing something does help normalize it. And in contrast, Nepal legalized homosexuality in 2007, so it really hasn't been very long. And I think over time, I think it's definitely going to be more normalized. And also having said that, India, Nepal, and the Hindu religion has concepts of a third gender and a different sexuality in it already, which does help. I think it's sort of. Yeah, there is, there are a group of people, and they're not exactly well treated, but there are a group of people who are sort of recognized as being not male or female, but of an other gender. And this is something that's been around for a long time. And I think maybe that it's sort of a bit easier to accept something like that than it is maybe in the Western setting. Yeah, I'd encourage you to look at the Metis people, who are people who maybe are assigned male at birth but act and behave as female, and there's this sort of recognition that exists. I don't even know how long. I think for all I know, forever.
So are they able to marry? Do they function within the arranged marriage system, or are they just not even sort of put forth as potential partners by their families?
More the latter. It's. I mean, like they're still sort of a group of people who are considered outcasts, but are also employed to bring good luck. So there's this weird. I don't quite understand this sort of like disconnect between the fact that you wouldn't want your child to be a partner of these people or necessarily within your family, but having said that, you might employ them in barracks or royal palaces to bring good luck. It's just a disconnect that I don't quite understand.
So I just looked up Meti, which is spelled METI for anyone who wants to look it up. And Wikipedia tells me that in the country of Nepal, unnatural sex is illegal. And in 2004, 39 Meti individuals were arrested and detained for spreading perversion. So it does seem like even though that is sort of a concept that exists, and is maybe not as sort of unfamiliar as in some Western cultures, that doesn't necessarily mean they don't face significant discrimination and obstacles. So
yeah, it's one thing. How do I phrase this? I think it's interesting that a lot of like the fear around homosexuality, at least in Western countries, is directed at men, like male homosexualities, whereas women seem to just be like lesbian women seem to just be not even acknowledged as having existed. And I wonder if that's maybe what this film is getting at, that like the families don't even suspect that they're a couple because it's just so unheard of. But I don't know enough about Nepali culture or Nepali.
Yeah, no, I get that. Like I think there the fact that they were sort of hanging out together a lot. I think people would have probably just assumed they were friends more than anything. And like when she came over to the family's house and bought some presents and stuff like that. Again, I think it was sort of under the view of everyone else that this is just her friend, not her partner or anyone like that. So I do think there's a degree of sort of being able to be sort of hide that relationship easier for these two women than if it was two men.
What did you guys think of the fact that the fiance is never seen? What did you think of that as like a stylistic choice?
I thought it was really good because I think it really sort of, I think there's a tendency to, there could have been a tendency to make it so that the fiance is the injured party here, right? Like this person, he had this relationship set out which followed the norm, but then this lady who acted in some sort of unusual way, possibly in a perverse way, and so this what was supposed to be this unification of these two families didn't occur, and I think there could have been sort of a storyline where he was seen more as the injured party, which it really wasn't, because first of all, we never really got to see him at all, so he was very much a plot device and not a person at all. And also, like, anytime he was around, there was always this very sinister music that was being played, very much horror. There was a moment where the music started playing, and I got confused as to why we've suddenly transitioned from like a romantic comedy to a horror film.
It was such a drastic tonal shift there. Yeah. It's like he's less a character and more sort of a stand-in, a sort of embodiment for societal norm around marriage and sort of the expectations placed on women, right? Which are to get married in a way that sort of helps, or at least doesn't hurt, the family's social standing and produces children to carry on the family line. So I think he's less sort of an individual character than an embodiment of those things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tanja, that she just seems to be going through the motions in so many of those scenes where the family is introducing her to her fiance, where she's just sitting there mute while everyone else does the talking and explaining about why they'd be such a good couple. And yeah, the fiance himself is immaterial. Like he's just a prop almost for the family to combine their dynasties and their dowries or whatever. And her emotions or her connection or intimacy with him is immaterial. It's just a blank face compared to her intimacy and connection with Kieran, which is so sort of loving, and the music is so sweet and whimsical at times. And the way they talk about each other is so bodily, the way they describe, loving each other's skin and their smell and their sweat and their eyes. Like it's so much about the specificity of their facial features and their bodies compared to the fiance, which is just this blank space.
Yeah.
I do want to highlight that when you mentioned sort of Duncan about going with the flow, I think that there's sort of a tendency of thinking about all of this in the sense that, were you being forced into a marriage, are you being sort of found and told that you're going to be carted off, kind of thing, and that isn't really a Nepali practice. Like, maybe it was once upon a long time ago, but like no one's going to force you into a marriage, or that's a very rare thing that happens. It's often this sort of societal and family pressure about, following through the motions of what you need to do. And it's not that Dia was necessarily forced into it. It's just more she didn't resist. Right, like she doesn't do anything about it, and she just sort of is a bystander to this decision about her life that has huge impact on her specifically. And again, this goes back into sort of the difference between maybe relationships in sort of Western settings and Nepal, is that these relationships have a much bigger impact on the family as well as the individual. And so it's sort of a recognition there where the family is like, well, it has so much impact on us, we should have a stake in what the relationship is, or who it's with, and what it's about. And so that gets sort of prioritized to such an extent that the individual sort of wants and needs are considered, but if they're particularly outside of the norm of things, then they may be overridden for the sort of the family good kind of thing. It's like, you can choose who you marry. However, we will do the initial sifting through and finding the people for you, and also while taking into account sort of the benefit for the family itself. And I think there's a recognition of it's not always going to be you're being forced into a marriage. It's going to be more, there is just pressure for you to just follow this
But also, while you can choose, it has to be a partner from sort of an appropriate background and standing, right? So you do have choice, but it can't be just anyone.
Yeah, it's the sort of like the family does the initial sift. They will find appropriate candidates. You can choose, you can accept and reject as much as you want, but the initial sift comes from the family finding XYZ person, and it will often be sort of through contacts of contacts. We'll say, well, oh, actually, there's this person who has a son and daughter of an age where they're ready to marry, and do want us to set up a contact, right? And so like then it will often be, and again, this isn't true about always, but especially with arranged marriages, it will be the family that sit down and meet, right? Kind of like that scene where it was the family members that met, and often the groom and the potential groom and bride don't really say much to each other. They just sort of sit there while everyone else around them says what a great relationship this is, or what they do, or what they're all about. And so it's a lot more sort of a family arranged sift. And it's just a sharp contrast where in sort of more Western settings, you may not even have the family involved at all. And there's no sort of like approval mechanism here.
That's interesting, that more nuanced or complex explanation for arranged marriages. Because, I think the Western perspective is much more simplistic. But it sounds like there is choice, but like lots of editorializing and sort of soft pressure applied by the family to make particular choices, or to reduce it to a particular set of candidates. And it kind of makes sense, given that, as you say, the family feels like they have a big stake in the marriage, so they feel like they are entitled to have a big part in the choosing of the fiance or the couple or whatever.
For anyone who's interested in that, this is obviously not like the same, but it's definitely adjacent. We watched Indian matchmaking on Netflix a while ago, and that sort of touches on some of those practices and ideas, but also sort of shows in a sort of more modern perspective how sort of more modern ideas and more traditional ideas can sort of work together. And also there's a VOK episode on that as well. So
one other thing I did want to compliment was the dancing scenes, especially the final dancing scene where Dia is in her full dress. Yeah, I thought that was beautiful, and I thought it was like a powerful kind of expression of emotion. I don't know exactly what the dancing scenes are meant to represent, but it seems to be like she's able to express more through dance, which she can't necessarily express to her family or in front of her family. And that seemed to be what made her and Kieran fall in love, was her dancing and her body and her movements. So I think that was like the one bit of hopefulness at the end of the film, was that she was able to express herself, and walking away with her child. It's like, okay, there's maybe a little bit of hope for those two, mum and child. And the only other question I had was the title of the movie, I think it's Soongava or Soongava. Do you guys know what that means? I couldn't find a translation for it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either, to be honest. I was like, I don't quite understand why this is called this.
Yeah.
So I can't help you there.
Oh, interesting. Well, if anyone knows, let us pop a explanation in the comments.
Yes, please.
One last thing I wanted to sort of bring up about this film, in contrast to the other two, is I think Nepali films, Nepal can be portrayed, it is a developing country, and it can be portrayed as more on sort of the, like, you're looking at people in villages, people who are, sort of poor or working the land, and there is a lot of that. But I also thought this was a much, it was also another perspective of Nepal, of this urban life. These people are going to bars and clubs, and there's these busy traffic roads and stores and dance lessons, and that it was a much more, I guess, developed in a way, or at least what we might consider developed perspective of Nepal, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've got a lot of diversity of settings in these three films. We've got the village, we've got the city, and then we've got the mountain in our final film. We might move to the mountain now for our final discussion.
I have a little fun fact about that, which is that the actress who played Kiran in Soongava, Nisha Adhikari, is the first Nepali actress who has climbed Mount Everest.
Really?
Yeah, I thought that was a cool little fact. So
that's awesome.